As David said, I'm Daniel Waugh. I'm very happy to be here with you guys tonight. This is my first time speaking at Common Ground, if you haven't been around for a while. I've been a home pastor here for almost 2 years now, coming up this summer. I was an apprentice in David's group before that. And David approached me probably like a month and a half ago or so. And he's like, Danny, I want you to speak at Common Ground. I'm like, okay. I've been a home pastor for a year and a half or so. I'd be happy to. But then he says, I want you to speak about the hardest thing you've been through in your entire life. And that's when thoughts started coming into my head. And it was something that took a lot of prayer and time with God for me to be up here tonight. Because this is something, it is the hardest thing I've been through in my entire life so far. And it's something that not a lot of people know about me, even people that were around me at the time, even people today that I'm close friends with. They don't know the story that happened in my life. And a lot of it has to do with the shame that I had when I was within it. I'm also someone who likes to keep things to myself. I always say, if you don't ask, I'm not going to tell you. But anyways, that's what I'm going to be sharing about tonight. It is the point in my life where I was the most weak. I was hopeless, afraid, and helpless. I'm going to do this. I'm not David. So, what I do know, though, in my weakness, that's where God is strong. At the time of my life when I was at the lowest, that's the time where God comes through. 2 Corinthians 12, 9 through 10, it says, And he has said to me, My grace is sufficient for you. For power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I delight in my weaknesses, in my insults, in distresses and persecutions and difficulties on behalf of Christ, for when I am weak, then I am strong. And that's something that I have had to learn, that in my weaknesses, that's where I'm strong. We don't want to be weak. We don't want to go through struggle. We don't want to deal with things. But in those times, that's where God is the strongest. That's where his power comes through the most. And that's where we learn to rely upon him, as we'll see with my story tonight. So tonight we're going to walk through the story of Joseph. I like to put my story with Joseph because it's very close to what happened to Joseph. It's not, I didn't get sold into slavery, no. But I'm going to correlate it with my story. We're going to go through his story and talk about my story alongside of it. And I'm really hoping that many of you can gain freedom tonight from your struggles, from your issues, from the bondage that you have in your life. So as I go through, I'm going to be walking through 5 key areas, 5 key areas that can determine the outcome of your biggest struggle. Because the thing with your biggest struggle is you're going to have it. Every single one of you in this room is going to have a biggest struggle. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So how can we make it out on the other side stronger and having a stronger relationship with God along the way and surviving it while you're in the midst of it? So let's pray. Father, would you be here tonight as we talk about your word and Joseph's story, as we talk about my story? God, I pray that your presence would be evident. God, that my story can bring freedom in people's lives here tonight. God, the things that you allowed me to go through, let it be a blessing, and may it help many here tonight, Lord. Be with us now in this time. Amen. All right, so a little bit of background with Joseph. If we want to put up Genesis 17:7, we have to go a few generations back to understand why Joseph had to go through what he went through. Joseph's father's father was Abraham, and Abraham was promised by God that his lineage was going to be a people that was chosen for him. So let's read. It says, and he has said, down here. I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you, throughout their generations as an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your descendants after you. And I'll give to you and to your descendants after you the land where you live as a stranger, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. So Abraham's descendants will be God's people. And as we know, they're the Israelites. So think about that as we walk through Joseph's story. God made a promise to Abraham that his lineage was going to be his people. So think about that as we go through Joseph's story. So let's dig into his story. Genesis 37, 2 through 3. These are the records of the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when he was 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers, while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all of his other sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a multicolored tunic. So what we learn from this, Joseph was a part of a big family. He was loved greatly by his father. Yes, his brothers hated him, but the reason why his brothers hated him was not in his control. He was born into it. His father loved him just due to him being his son in his old age, with the wife that he had Joseph with. It's a lot of stuff, but Joseph didn't have control over it. But overall, he had a pretty blessed life. His father loved him. Things were going well for him, at least up to the age of 17. So think about that. Think about how Joseph, he's 17 years old when he starts going through these things. Many of us in this room are not too far off from 17. Some are older, some are closer. But put yourself in Joseph's shoes as we walk through his story, because he was around our age when he went through these things. Similarly, I was around that age. I was 18 years old when I encountered the biggest struggle in my life. When I was growing up, I had a blessed life, very similar to Joseph. I have a family who loves me, cares about me. I didn't have brothers that hated me. We may have had our feuds, but they did not hate me. I was blessed. My parents put me through a Christian education. They sacrificed a lot for that. I was following God. I did as many ministries as I possibly could. My life, everything that I put my mind to, I was able to do. It seemed like nothing could stop me. If I put my mind to a new hobby, I would succeed at it. If I put my mind to something else, I would succeed at it. It seemed like God was blessing me, and I didn't know why. Why would God choose me to just allow me to excel at so many things, to be good at so many things, to feel like there's nothing blocking me, nothing getting in my way in my life? So grew up that way. I graduated high school, valedictorian, top of the class, if that meant anything. I look back, it doesn't really mean too much other than I used the ropes, special ropes I got, I think, to tie up blankets, something like that. That's about, yeah. Anyways, and then after I graduated, I started my education, SDSU. I was 18 years old, starting to pursue a degree. Started out electrical engineering, moved to computer engineering. So I had a plan. I was going to go to school, get my degree, get a job, get married, have a wonderful life. That was my plan, and I thought that nothing could get in the way. Nothing could get in the way of me accomplishing that. Nothing ever did get in the way. I was always blessed. I excelled at what I did. And so why would it be any different? So the first thing I want to bring up about your biggest struggle, or struggles in general, in order to get through it, you have to be prepared and have valid expectations. And I don't mean prepared as in you're going to be prepared for the actual physical situation, because most likely you're not. I'm saying a preparation in your relationship with God. Having a relationship with him that when the struggle comes, when the hurt comes, you'll be able to get through it. And also having valid expectations. When we become a Christian, we can have this idea that God is on my side and nothing can stop me. Everything's going to be easy. Nothing's going to get in the way of me. But that's actually the opposite of what God speaks to us. He says you should expect opposition. You should expect trials. You should expect persecution. These are things that come along with your Christianity. So we need to have a valid expectation of what is to come. And that expectation is that there's going to be struggles. There's going to be big stuff that hits you guys if it already hasn't. It sure hit me. So let's go into Joseph's story further, where we actually hit the struggle. Genesis 37:12. Then his brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are your brothers not pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them." And he said to them, "I will go." Jumping to verse 23. So it came about when Joseph reached his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the multicolored tunic that was on him, and they took him and threw him into a pit. Now the pit was empty without any water in it. They were leaving him there for dead. Jumping to verse 28. Then some Midianite traders passed by, so they pulled him out and lifted Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. So they brought Joseph into Egypt. Joseph's life took a turn for the worse in an instant. He went to go see his brothers. They threw him in a pit, left him for dead, sold him into slavery. Just like that. 17 years old, he had a whole life ahead of him. But his life was forever changed in that moment. They sold him for 20 shekels of silver, which by today's weight of silver, it's like $300. They sold his brother for $300 into slavery. I guess, from their perspective, it's probably a better deal than just having him die. I don't know. Just don't put yourself in their perspective. So Joseph's life was great until this point in his life. And I want you to notice in Joseph's story, we don't get an actual response from him until the end. We don't get a dialogue where Joseph says, "Why God?" or "What's happening?" or kind of like how, if you know the story of Job, how he was able to have a response. We don't really get to see that. All we get to see is the outcome of his response. My life, as I was saying, it was going along smoothly. Things were blessed. The worst day of my life started when I was 18 years old. It was a Thursday night before Common Ground. I was out eating In-N-Out over here before In-N-Out moved. I was by myself eating dinner, and this was a couple hours before, probably around 5 o'clock or so. I was going to go to the prayer meeting, but I was going to pick up my friend. He lived over in the middle of El Cajon. So I went, after In-N-Out, I went and I picked up my friend, and we started on our way back to church. Getting closer to church, and I began making a turn, coming to church, making a turn onto a road, and wham, something hit me. Something hit me as I was making my turn. I had no idea what happened. I got out of the vehicle. We got out of the vehicle, and a motorcycle collided head-on with me, and it threw him across the road. And I'm not going to get too much into it, but in the end, it resulted in his death. In that moment, I was devastated. The questions came through my head. The main thing I was thinking is I never saw him. I never saw him. How did this happen? I never saw him. That's what I was telling everyone who was asking me questions, the officers. I never saw him. And those were the questions. That was a thought I had. The questions started coming in. Why is this happening to me? God, what's going on? I'm scared. What's going to happen to me? My life's been great up to this point. Now what's going to happen? What's going to happen to my plans and my aspirations? My dad picked me up a couple hours after, and I went to sleep that night, not having any answers. And I didn't have any answers for some time. So that was a trauma that took place in my life. You could imagine the shock and the hurt and the questions that were going through my head through that time. Like, just think about yourself. I don't know how close you are to 18. I wouldn't want anyone to go through anything like that. But when you're 18 years old, I had my license for a year. It's not something you want to go through. The next point that I want to talk about stems out of this. A very vital, important part to your biggest struggle is your response, and more importantly, your initial response. What is your initial response to hearing news, or to someone doing something to you, or some act of God happening, or you going through your biggest struggle? What is your response? Do you curse God? Do you say, God, why did you do this to me? Do you pin the blame on him? Do you pin the blame on someone else? Or do you bless God and say, God, this is in your hands? I didn't know that I did this, but I'll talk about what my initial response to this was. Yes, of course, I had those questions in my head and things running through, but I was on the phone with my mother right after it, telling her what happened. I don't remember this, but she told me that what I said to her, you can imagine how my mother was reacting to this, having your son just be in an accident that resulted in the death of a man. She told me that I said, Mom, it's going to be okay. God is sovereign. That was my gut reaction. That's what my reaction was in the moment. Your true colors are truly shown in the moment. You can tell yourself how you're going to respond to things, but you're not actually going to see what your response is until the struggle comes, or when the hurt comes, or when something bad happens. And I am so happy that is what my response. The first point, the preparation, absolutely played a part into that. My response was to turn to God, to say, God, you are sovereign. I don't know what's happening. I don't understand what's happening. I have all these questions, but you are in control. You are sovereign over this situation. So moving on, Joseph's life, things started getting better. We pick up in Genesis 39, 1 through 2. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there, and the Lord was with Joseph. So he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Jumping to verse 6a, so he left Joseph in charge of everything that he owned, and with him there he did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate. God went before Joseph to Egypt. He made sure that Joseph was put with Potiphar, who, from the looks of it, was a good man. He blessed him exceedingly in his household. He became the head honcho out of the slaves in the household. He put him in charge of everything that he owned. God went before him. And apparently Joseph had a good response to it, because he wouldn't have been the top of Potiphar's house if he didn't have a good response. In the midst of his struggle being sold and taken from his family, he chose God. He chose to be faithful to God. He chose to be faithful to God with his work in the situation that he was in. And God blessed him for it. But as many of you know, his story was not over. God had more in store for him, and he had a promise to fulfill from Abraham. My life followed similarly to Joseph's story. There's a period after the accident where, after the initial shock subsided, I had good counsel in my life. I had good friends in my life, mainly family and counsel. helped me through the initial trauma and the hurt that came from it. Within a couple of weeks, things started getting back to normal, and with some time, we actually found out what happened with the accident. A witness had a statement about a decision that the motorcyclist made that allowed me not to see him. Anyone in my position wouldn't be able to see him. So that question was answered as to that question of I never saw him, well, I didn't see him, and it was for a reason. So that question was answered. So my life started getting back to normal. I got a new truck. I continued with my education, and God still seemed to be blessing me despite the struggle that I went through. However, like Joseph, my struggle wasn't over. There was more to come. I wasn't able to put this behind me. I'm the type of person that just, when something happens, I just want to move on with my life, put it behind me, and keep going. Because I have that motivation to just keep going. I see the prize at the end. I want to get it. Okay, this happened. Push it aside and keep going. But this was a situation that absolutely did not allow me to do that. An important part in your struggle that will help you to the end is having a good perspective. How you view your struggle is extremely important. Do you view the struggle as God punishing you, as an act of his uncare for you, or maybe just a plain terrible thing that happens, some act of God? We can have that perspective, but God wants us to have a godly perspective. Looking at it through his eyes, not having to understand why you're going through it, but understand that he is going ahead of you and he is in charge of the situation. That's the perspective you have to have, God's perspective in the situation. My perspective in the situation, that is what it was. It kind of stemmed out of that response, that God is in charge of it all. I wrestled back and forth with this wanting to understand why this was happening. To understand that there has to be some reason as to why this is happening. It's got to be for someone else, for someone involved. There's got to be a reason. And I'm sure there is. But I didn't know what the reason was, and I still don't know what that reason is. I had to give up my understanding to God and have a perspective change. My perspective is not from me looking out from my closed-minded, my tunnel vision, and putting it from a perspective of God who is sovereign, looking over all things. He's in control, and he knows what's best for me. And he's the one who determines the outcome, not the devil and not me. Moving on with Joseph's story, Genesis 39, 6b. The story is not over yet. If the story did end after that, it would be a nice story. He was sold into slavery. He rose through the ranks in his master's household, and he was blessed exceedingly for it. But there's a promise that God has to keep to Abraham. Genesis 39, 6b says, "Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance." This is the part where I correlate most with him. Verse 7, "And it came about after these events that his master's wife had her eyes on Joseph. And she said, 'Sleep with me.' Jumping down to verse 10, though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he did not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. Now it happened one day that he went into the house to do his work, and none of the people of the household were there inside. So she grabbed him by his garment, saying, 'Sleep with me.' But he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called the men of her household and said to them, 'See, he has brought in a Hebrew to us to make fun of us. He came in to me to sleep with me, and I screamed. When he heard that I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled and went outside. Jumping down to verse 19. Now when his master heard the words of his wife, which he spoke to him, saying, This is what your slave did to me, his anger burned. So Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison. Once again, God blessed Joseph. He brought him up to a point where he was blessed, and he was at the top of where he was at. In his family, he was his father's favorite child. He was blessed. In Potiphar's house, he was the favorite slave, I guess. He was the top of the household in that regard. But boom, just like that again, in an instant, things changed. And he went from the top of Potiphar's household down to the lowliest place in all of Egypt, in the king's prison. That's not where you want to be. To the highest place that he could be in the situation that he was at, down to the lowest place. And it was because someone lied about him. Someone lied about him, betrayed him, and there was nothing that he could do or say that would stop him from being thrown into prison. And that's what happened. He got thrown into prison. A month or so after the incident in my life, the police report came out, and we found out that the witness had some ulterior motives. And she changed her story, changed her initial statement that she had. And this in turn pinned all the blame on me. There was nothing that I could say or do that could change that. I was not able to move on from this struggle in my life. Based off the police report and the witness's statement, the recommendation was to charge me with a misdemeanor for the crime that I committed. I was devastated. Again. The questions, police report has a recommendation at the end, so it doesn't necessarily mean anything until the district attorney's office gets a hold of it, if you know anything about crime. I hope you only know stuff about crime because of crime shows. I thought I would only. Anyways, I was devastated again. I mean, you can just imagine. Like, I have the answer to my question as to what happened. And now it's my fault. According to the state's eyes, according to or the county's eyes, I'm the one who's at fault here, and everything is on me. And again, questions, why is this happening? What do I do? I'm not a criminal. I would never willingly do any crime. You could ask my wife. I have a hard time trespassing, or I don't know. I follow the rules. I don't speed. I'm a good driver. People around me can back me up on that. Why is this happening to me? In school, I'd be the one that's the good kid, the one that doesn't get into trouble. But this is where I was at. This started, so I don't know when the police report came out, sometime after a month, 2 months, I don't know when it came out. With that, it started a process that I hope that no one has to go through. I think like 3 or 4 months after the incident, I got my license taken away from me for a year. I had to move back in with my parents. They had to drive me everywhere. My future girlfriend drove me for the second half of the year, who's now my wife. But that was the start of our relationship, was her driving me everywhere. It's great. But I had my license taken away from me for that year period. But in the midst of this, I was not going to allow, again, there was complete uncertainty as to what was going to happen with this. I didn't know what was coming. I could kind of try to see what was coming, but it was something that was always on my mind, lingering in my mind, what is going to happen with this? So I had my license taken away. But I didn't allow the situation like the devil wanted to stop me from doing his work. God's work, not the devil's work. I continued with my ministry. In the midst of this, I was in Micah 6:8. If you don't know what that is, discipleship program here at the church. I was in the middle of that during this whole occurrence. Most of the people I was in it with had no idea I was going through it. I was doing ministry. I did like every ministry that I could. What a single dude who loved God. I did everything that I could. And I wasn't going to allow this situation to stop me. The furtherment of this initial trauma into them pinning all the blame on me, I wouldn't allow that to stop me. Because I knew, like from my perspective and from my response, God is in control, God is sovereign. So that summer, I went on a trip to Kenya, a missions trip with Micah 6:8. And it was a phenomenal experience. Actually, the last time I spoke to the last time I spoke to a larger group of people was in Kenya. I spoke to 500 Sudanese high schoolers who all just had blank faces. Because they came from Sudan, which is a war-torn country, and they had rough lives. So I was just sitting there without a microphone, speaking to 500 Sudanese kids. It was an amazing experience in Kenya. I wouldn't trade it for anything. But waiting for me when I got back from Kenya was a letter from the district attorney's office that they formally charged me with a misdemeanor. And this was 6 months after the incident. Justice is slow, or their justice is slow. 6 months after, that's when I was officially charged with the misdemeanor. And that started a 6 more month long process of going to court and then going home feeling like nothing got done. And then you go to court again and you feel like nothing got done. But it was 3 times that I went to court over those 6 months. We got a lawyer that we could afford to help us through the process because we don't know anything about crime and the courts and that type of stuff. It's not something I would ever want to be in. So over those 6 months, over the whole period, ever since the police report came out, I was just in this constant battle in my head of just worry and anxiety of what was going on. And I felt, ashamed as well. According to the county and the state, I was a criminal. But I didn't lose sight of God at the end. I knew he was going to get me through it. He was there alongside it with me. And that is what he did. At the end of that 6 month period, which is about a year after the actual incident, was the final court case where I was done. Having this thing drag out for an entire year, I just wanted everything to be done. I didn't care. I don't care what you did to me. I'm done. We settled with a plea bargain. I didn't want to go through the whole process of paying a lawyer to go through a whole trial. A plea bargain is something that 90% of cases end in. It's something where you admit to a lesser charge, give up your rights to a jury, and then you take the punishment of whatever that lesser charge was. So that's what I did. I took the plea bargain. But this is the part of the story. There's a lot of little stories just like this put throughout my story. But I want to share this specific one, which was the last day when I was in court, where I was charged. The family of the deceased was there. And after the whole thing took place, God compelled me and told me, you need to go pray with them. That's not something I wanted to do. But let me tell you, that was the most freeing thing of it all. I went over to the family, and I talked with them. I gave them my condolences and my apologies. This is a hopeless situation for all parties. And I prayed with them. I allowed God to enter a situation that was hopeless. That's what we got to do in our biggest struggle. Allow God to enter a time or a situation that is hopeless. God was really there in that time. He was there with the family and with me. He was evident. God was good through it all. The sentence required me that I pay a fine. I go to jail for 30 days. I didn't go to jail for 30 days since I'm not a violent offender or it was my first offense. I'm not a violent offender. I wore an ankle bracelet for 16 days. I was actually here at Common Ground with an ankle bracelet for 2 weeks. Nobody knew a thing. I was very good at hiding it. I was able to still go to school, go to church with it on, but that was my sentence. I thought it was weird. A year after something, you punish someone with an ankle bracelet for 16. Anyways, this isn't about my issues with our justice system. But anyways, it's about my story and how I feel. So yeah, that pretty much is my story. It's a year-long struggle that felt like it would never end, but it finally did. Oh, I also had 3 years of informal probation, which really means that you're not allowed to commit a crime. That's what the judge told me. But then I'm like, aren't I already not supposed to commit a crime? It was weird. So that was that. That was the end of it. Well, 2 years ago was the official end of it because my probation was over. And God was with me all the way through it. This point 4 typically applies to the situation, but it doesn't always apply to the situation. It's a matter of your forgiveness. I felt wronged by multiple parties in this whole situation. I would always say, if this person said that, or if they did a better job, or if that person did that, then I would be fine. This was probably the hardest thing for me to do. The situation was closed out in a year, but it took me time to forgive the parties involved. But God commands us to forgive. And let me tell you, forgiveness is so freeing. You don't have to think about the person in the light that you were thinking about them. I mean, if you were able to physically say, I forgive you, it's freeing for both parties. I'm not able to do that. But I was able to forgive over that time, and it was very freeing. Very freeing. In order to truly make it through your struggle, if there's someone that wronged you or hurt you, you need to forgive. You don't have to trust. You don't necessarily have to have the same amount of trust in someone, but you need to forgive. God commands that of you, and God knows what he's doing when he commands us of something. He knows he has our best interests at heart. God talks about forgiveness a lot in the Bible. I think it's because we don't like doing it. But yeah, I was able to forgive over that time. So finally, let's talk. That was my story, that whole year-long process of just something that I would never want to go through again, but I'm glad that I went through it because of the man that I am today. Let's look at Joseph's story to finish it up. To see what happened with him. So we had him in prison, in the king's prison, and we are going to jump up. Pharaoh had a dream, and none of his interpreters could interpret it. So verse 8 of Genesis 41, it says, Now in the morning his spirit was troubled, so he sent messengers and called for all the soothsayers, priests of Egypt, and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. Joseph continues on for a bunch of verses to interpret his dream. A famine's going to come on the land. Verse 38. Then Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this in whom there is a divine spirit?" So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has informed you of all of this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you are. You shall be in charge of my house, and all my people shall be obedient to you. Only regarding the throne will I be greater than you." Pharaoh also said to Joseph, "See, I have placed you over all the land of Egypt." Joseph was raised up from the lowest spot in Egypt up to the second highest spot over all of Egypt. Just like that. Because God was with Joseph, Joseph was faithful to him, and God also had a promise to fulfill. At the end of Genesis, we see Joseph's response, his actual response, what he says. Because the promise that I was talking about, God had to fulfill his promise of keeping the lineage, and it was his people. If Joseph didn't go to Egypt, he wouldn't have been able to bring his family to Egypt and save them from the famine. And they go into slavery, but that's besides the point. God used Joseph to bring the Israelites, or his family, into Egypt to save the lineage so that they still could be God's people and they didn't die out. That's what his response is, Genesis 45, 7 through 8, where this is talking when he's talking to his brothers. "So God sent me ahead of you to ensure for you a remnant of the earth and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now therefore it was not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh and a lord of all his household and ruler over all the land of Egypt." Genesis 50, 20, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result to keep many people alive." That's the perspective that I have on my situation. The devil meant evil for me. He brought this huge struggle against me in my life, but I was not going to allow that to determine the rest of my life. God has blessed me exceedingly since that point. I have a wonderful wife. I have a wonderful family. I have a wonderful church family. I have a dream job that I've always wanted. And I truly believe that I wouldn't have all of this, these blessings that I have, if I didn't go through this. I'm a completely different man on the other side of it. God grew me so much in the midst of it. On one side, I was a kid going into it. On the other side, I came out a man of God. When God puts a huge struggle in your life, a big thing, that means the devil's trying to get you down because God has a big plan in your life. A large struggle means God has a big plan. That's the perspective we have to have. God has a plan for our lives. He's going to use us to do many things. I don't understand completely why the thing happens. I don't know who I affected. Could have been the family, could have been the lawyer, could have been the district attorney, could have been the officer. I have no idea. Could have been you guys tonight. I don't know. But I don't have to know because God is sovereign. He goes ahead of me. So that's what I want to bring into closing, into a final point. Don't put it up there yet. And if you want to put the lights down, we're going to go into ministry time in a moment. This point is something that I think in the midst of me preparing this message, I was still going through. This last point doesn't care about how prepared you were. It doesn't care about what your response was. It doesn't care about your perspective. It may go a little into forgiveness. But this last thing is as you can have freedom in your struggle. A big struggle that happened in your life, or maybe a small struggle that happened in your life, that is just on your heart all the time. It's sitting down, it's festering, it's boiling within you. You may have unforgiveness towards other people. That is what is allowing the devil to win. When we allow the struggle to stick with us, even though it's over, even though it's long gone, when we don't gain freedom from it, we're saying, yes, devil, you determine how my life is going to turn out. You all tonight have a choice of freedom. I'm sure as I was speaking and through this whole series, you're thinking about struggles that have happened in the past and things that have happened to you, things that you had no control over. People who have hurt you, things that have happened to you, to your family, that you had no control over. Maybe you even did have control over it, but you can get freedom tonight. You have the choice of freedom. That's what God gives us. He's waiting there. He's saying, come to me. I will give you rest. I will give you freedom. That's what he's doing. He's a good father that's waiting for you. We can choose to hold on to the struggle and bury it deep down in our hearts, not wanting to discuss it or share it like I, for many years, didn't want to do. But it's time. It's time for you to give it up to God and to say, God, this is yours. I want the freedom that you offer. So we're going to go into a time of ministry now. And if that is you, if you have something in your life where you need freedom from, you have a past struggle or a hurt or a pain, someone did something to you, and you've just been holding on to it, festering in your heart, it's time for you to gain freedom from it. It's time. So if that's you, I want you to come on up as we go into this time of worship. Ministry people can come on up. And you guys can do it. Believe me, I've been in your guys' your guys' places many times where I chose not to respond. And the only one that you're hurting is yourself when you do that. So make that choice and choose freedom. Let's go into this time.